I made this video to let the subscribers of the channel know that I'm creating a new playlist dedicated to the theatre of philosophy. In this playlist, I'll include videos addressing comments, doubts, questions, and inquiries about the videos already published on the channel. I'm still deciding on the name of the playlist, but possible titles could be Comments, Questions and Doubts, or something similar. The goal is to create a space for deeper reflections on the topics discussed, answering viewers' questions and fostering greater engagement between the channel's content and you, the audience. Additionally, I want to give the channel a more didactic approach, bringing myself closer to you. Many of you may not have an in-depth knowledge of philosophy, and it's natural for the topics covered in the videos to raise questions. This playlist will be a way to address those questions in a more detailed and thoughtful manner, going beyond quick replies in the comments. I'll also include polls more frequently, which will be an integral part of this playlist. The final name will likely be something like Comments, Doubts and Polls, reflecting the three pillars that compose it. Today, I'm launching this playlist with a poll I recently published on the channel. The question is, in your view, which dimension of death is the most frightening? The options are mystical, ontological, phenomenological, fantastical, and concrete. So far, the voting looks like this. % voted for the mystical dimension, 10% for the ontological dimension, 20% for the phenomenological dimension, 10% for the concrete dimension. There are still few votes, but the current trend points to the concrete dimension as the most frightening. I agree with this trend, and later on I'll explain why. But first, I'll make a brief digression on the topic of death in philosophy. Throughout its millennia-long history, dating back over 2,500 years from the ancient Greeks to the present day, philosophy has always been fueled by fundamental questions. These questions, more than the proposed answers, are what keep philosophy alive. We can divide the history of philosophy into four major periods: ancient, medieval, modern, and contemporary. In each of these periods, different questions took center stage, while others were temporarily set aside or reinterpreted. Among the questions that have most marked philosophy, four stand out: the question of God, the question of man, the question of death, the question of time. The question of man gained greater prominence starting in the modern era, as in the ancient and medieval periods. It was often subordinated to the question of God. In the medieval world, for example, man was seen as a creature in relation to a divine creator, integrated into a greater order. In Greek philosophy, especially in the classical period, with Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, man was conceived as part of a cosmic worldview that integrated humanity into a larger cosmic order. The question of death and the question of time, on the other hand, have always been challenging and gained even more relevance from the modern era onward, especially in the contemporary world. These questions reveal an inherent characteristic of human beings, their duality. Although some contemporary thinkers question the validity of duality, such as the separation between body and mind or life and death, I believe that human complexity does not eliminate this duality but makes it even more evident. Duality and the relationship. Between death and time, human duality can be observed in various dimensions, such as the relationship between man and God and between death and time. These dualities are interconnected. The question of man is intrinsically related to the question of God, just as the question of death is intrinsically linked to the question of time. When we speak of the relationship between death and time, we are referring to a relationship that involves three temporal dimensions: the before death, the now of death, the after death. These three dimensions reflect how human beings deal with death throughout their existence. The before death is the time of expectation, where death merges with life itself. It is the moment when we reflect on the meaning of death and how it affects our existence. The now of death is the time of dying, where life gives way to death. Finally, the after death is the time of imaginative projection, where we try to imagine what happens after death, even though this is, by definition, inaccessible to the living. These three dimensions are synthesized in the famous work of the French painter Paul Gauguin, titled, "Where Do We Come From? What are we? Where are we going?" This work, like many other artistic and philosophical expressions, reflects the human concern with the before, the now, and the after of death.
Death as a philosophical theme leads us to reflect on our own existence and the relationship we have with time. The poll I proposed on the channel reflects this complexity by asking which dimension of death is the most frightening. The current trend pointing to the concrete dimension suggests that death in its most immediate and tangible reality is what impacts us the most. However, as we've seen, death cannot be dissociated from time. It challenges us to reflect on the before, the now and the after, questions that, although they may seem abstract, are fundamental to understanding our own existence.